Now, Burak does not come from a geoscience background, unless you've been hiding that from me, Burak. Burak is going to take us in quite a different direction, but still thinking about the world of certainty, uncertainty, but very much more in that world of real estate and infrastructure. Burak, over to yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. So I was just thinking about this. How do I follow after Sarah and Sarah? But I'll do my best, right? I guess from Sarah's presentation, if you think of the whole value chain, when you think about understanding the rocks, I'm going to try to pivot all the way to the other end to kind of think about the clients, the use cases for those rocks and the use cases for those minerals. And then in terms of demand, where do we sit? So when I read the title, I was also a little confused. I have to admit, living in the uncertain times, somebody quoted, the famous quote about the best of times, these are the worst of times. So there are loads of things we can look for where we can kind of find opportunity and hope. And there are also many things, as you said, we kind of takes us into darker corners. I guess the thing that I wanted to focus on is that in a place of uncertainty, the only thing that we can control is what we do, is what we commit. And from a space of coming from a place of kind of client place from real estate and infrastructure, what I would like to really speak to you about is the role of responsible materials in that space and what we can control and what we cannot and what we can influence. But to start with, I would like to talk about this from a context perspective. And my presentation is going to be a lot less technical. So I just apologize for that upfront. I don't know, this was kind of mind-blowing to me just to do a bit of research that I wasn't also aware, even though I have been in the sector for 25 plus years, is 40 to 50% of extracted raw materials globally are used by the construction industry. It is the largest consumer of steel, nearly accounting 50% of global steel demand. But you don't hear about us. We are not visible to a lot of people. It just happens. Buildings just get built, bridges are built, tunnels are made. So when you think about our industry, just in the UK, steel, concrete, aggregates are mainly majority of our materials. UK construction produces 62% of total waste, even though we have very high recycling rates. And what we send to landfill in the UK is just something like 5 to 10%. But most projects achieve 90-95% recycling of non-hazardous waste, but that still counts for 32% of all waste. So we are a very large industry who is very, very wasteful. I'm not looking at extracting those minerals and materials and raw materials, but I'm talking about how we use them. Majority of our raw material suppliers come from UK. And so we do, as a construction industry, are very good in terms of utilizing resources in the UK, Europe, and obviously from Asia. But I'm not sure if this was discussed, but all those rare minerals challenges, from a human rights risk, whereas DRC with cobalt or Chilean mines with lithium, they're also applicable to us because we are 40% of global emissions as an industry. And decarbonizing construction is a major challenge that is one of those really hard to abate sectors. And obviously we rely on steel and we rely on other industries and transport, and we employ millions of people across the globe, if not billions of people. Construction typically in economics is the largest employer when you think about in terms of creating employment. So we are a major consumer, and equally there are plenty of competing priorities. There is a lot of old school thinking, assuming that there are still plenty of raw materials. I must admit, this is a sectoral problem we have. We are very traditional in the way we approach things, and a lot of our thinking hasn't shifted. I think what's also happening is that there are plenty of economic headwinds. We are multiple layers away from the raw materials and mining. When I sit in a client role or support a client, advising them, they are dealing with a tier one contractor who's dealing with a wholesaler, who's dealing with a manufacturer. Then there is refinement of those materials. And then you might end up in the mine that actually extracts it. So in many ways, we hold our tier one contractors accountable, but we are just not close enough to those mining risks as much as our site risks. And in terms of general understanding of it, I would say that a lot of people in our supply chain, our understanding of the whole custody of chain in the construction sector is generally very poor. There is, we're dealing with high levels of waste, high levels of unproductivity as a sector. So we have plenty of headaches already as a sector, which is right in front of our eyes. In addition to that, we need to justify our actions to our paymasters. Typically in real estate, paymasters are private investors and private families or banks or lenders. And in terms of infrastructure, they're all of you. They're the taxpayers. So it's very interesting that we do have a lot of opportunity to go all the way down to the, into the chain, but we seem to just really focus as an industry mainly on what we can see. However, there's hope, there's opportunity. In our industry, everywhere you look at, whenever there has been change, it came from the investors and the clients. And what contractors most of the time do in the UK, you might know this, but many contractors operate in very, very, very tight margins. So they only really do things when the clients ask for it or regulation makes them do it. And that's a very cynical view to say that, but there are, of course, some leading contractors that we work with and I have worked with, but majority of the industry feels very, very constrained and feels under a lot of pressure. Despite these setbacks, so let me start talking about decarbonization, which I think is quite an interesting thing for us to hook onto, is that despite all the negative news, there is still strong public support. There's a piece of research from King's College that 64% of UK population is still supporting net zero. Depends on what your definition is. UK government is still driving this agenda, especially with the new energy crisis after crisis. Green premiums still exist in the building sector. There's better understanding of sustainability. There are legally binding, DCO grants and some private investors. I mean, mainly these are the pension funds and some other, socially conscious investors do want to make sure that the whole supply chain, not the people that's just in front of your eyes, are actually looked after and they're taken care of and the environment is considered. On the other hand, urbanization infrastructure is not going away. Right now, UN says 45% of the world lives in cities, and it's going to go up to 70% by 2050. And we do have a good record when it talks about, actually, if we put our mind to it, if you look at safety on UK sites, what we have achieved. So there is hope. But one thing that I can tell you for sure is that we are competing with any other industry, and we definitely are going to need more resources, and our demands are only going to grow. So that's the context. And when you take that context, how do we make this work, right? So I've been thinking one of the major challenges in our industry is the disconnect between economics, environment, and social factors. And one way where responsible materials can actually really become a high priority topic in our industry is connecting with decarbonization and just transition. So I had a call this week and I mentioned this topic, and I believe this person is attending this conference. She mentioned ethical decarbonization. I really like that phrase, because if you consider that, we have to take care of multiple elements of it. And is this possible? Absolutely possible, because we already have started to design out emissions, therefore build less, need less resources. There is low carbon machinery, low carbon energy. These are expensive for the moment, but it will change. We can build with less materials. We can have less emissions and lower cost. And we can minimize waste management in terms of maximizing modularity and design for disassembly. So usually in our industry, we always look to the end. And because a building lifespan is like 30, 40, sometimes 100 years, average UK house is pretty old. But actually where we can make the biggest difference is upfront in terms of design and in terms of how we think about it. But in just like embodied carbon, that's also something for us to think about, is I was thinking of the word embodied human rights. Everywhere you walk, every building you see, there's embodied carbon. But are we really thinking about, in terms of the embodied human rights, the impact on the human beings of that building, the copper that was used, or the steel where it came from, or the coal that was used to make that steel, or the sand sources? So generally, in conclusion, what I want to share with you is that real estate sector is generally behind public infrastructure. And you could kind of understand that because simply it's public spend. Therefore, people want to kind of think about that in terms of, greater good. It's actually a bit shocking. Like even new regulations in the UK, kind of leading regulations. I don't know if you know, there's a standard called Future Home Standard. This is all about us getting ready for, decarbonizing our new homes. They are about superior building fabrics, but not about responsible raw materials. And when you think about standards like LEED or BREEAM, I had a good chat to a very good friend of mine thinking about this, and he told me he worked for multiple major programs like I did, and he said that he got BREEAM excellent rating without even significantly thinking about raw materials. And then when you think of chain of custody standards, except with our obsession with timber and, woods and trees, all the other things in the chain, when it's about steel, rebar, concrete, all these chain of custody standards are very, very mature. So in many cases, clients, neither the clients nor the contractors really truly understand where their materials are really coming from. I had worked with a colleague who worked at London 2012 like me, and he worked in the velodrome, and obviously some of the material, the wood came from Siberia, and they were really concerned about it. But it's very, very specific to certain materials. It's not something that's done systematically. So in the infrastructure space, what we really need to do is move from paperwork to active risk management, and that's something that happens a lot. These big projects are fantastic about creating responsible procurement handbooks, robust procurement evaluation criteria, loads of systems. But what I would love to see more and more is people actually going out there on a modern slavery risk assessments and responsible procurement audits, actually going deeper and deeper into the supply chain to take greater responsibility. Because I genuinely think because they're public money, they actually have more license to do this in many ways and lead the way. Finally, what I would like to say is that I think there's a general opportunity, because right now everybody wants to do more with less. There is a greater focus on resilience and self-reliance, and strategic sourcing of raw materials is a hot topic. And net zero is a problem that we have and we have to solve if we do want to continue to live in this planet, whether we like it or not, or whether you agree with it or not. So I think in order to solve that, there are many, many solutions, but there are always things that people think about. One of the key things that I want to leave you with is two key misunderstandings. When people think about construction sector, they think about it's just construction. But just in the two segments of real estate and infrastructure, I try to explain to you the different dynamics and the complexities of it. And when we think about human rights in construction context, it is very much multi-layered. There is modern slavery of workers, there's community rights, there is supply chain, and therefore the raw materials. There is safety on sites. I must say, human rights is not really a topic that's in the kind of forefront of a lot of conversations. When I just literally came out with the phrase embodied human rights, it's really not part of the conversation. And what's really part of the conversation in terms of hooks is safety. So one thing that I have found out is that if you can kind of hook on to what safety has done, what we have achieved in the last 20 years when it regards to safety, I genuinely think there's a lot of lessons we can learn, the achievements we have done delivering large projects with very, low injury rates. There is a lot of learnings we can gain from that. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope it was interesting.
Burak, it wasn't just interesting, it was absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. Before I get to the concept of embodied human rights, which by the way just destroyed my messaging systems because everybody just went, wow, that's an amazing term. Yes, please. Why do you think the likes of construction, but it's not just construction, it's people making batteries, all kinds of things. Why do you think everybody forgets about the raw materials or doesn't include them when they are mapping out their supply chains or just doesn't talk about them? Why is that?
I have my own views, but I genuinely think it's really out of sight, out of mind, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's also, I think, because most of us in client roles and other roles, we don't feel empowered. We don't feel that we have the level of influence. So let me put it this way. If you're dealing with another industry where you might have a Google or your Nike, who's very prominent in that sector, right? If they make a decision and they want to change their supply chain and they decide to do that, they can do that because they have the buying power and they also have the reputation to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
In our industry, we are so fragmented. There is no Google in construction. There is nobody at that scale and size. If you look at main contractors, we are very small compared to all large European contractors, but even those are very small when you think about purchasing power and ability to shift the sector. So what you would need to shift the sector, you would have to bring such a large group of people moving in the same direction rather than, moving, I don't know, 10 major firms in a market that they might have a majority of share. So that is the biggest challenge, is that we don't have, individually, we don't have the buying power. And certainly it pretty feels very much, I think, feels for many people out of sight, out of mind.
And with that as well, so I mean, the construction industry, I mean, is huge, but as you said, it's fragmented. It's very difficult to get it to shift. But it's not just about the raw materials that you need coming in, because a lot of, I mean, if we think about what is the biggest source of exciting raw materials in the UK, and the answer is London. But those raw materials are much more valuable being in all the buildings, etc., all the copper wiring, etc., like that, than by knocking it down and starting again. But in terms of the waste side of things, so when you knock down a building, is there a shift within construction to be designing for that circularity, etc.? Is that coming, or is it just one or two actors who are thinking, you know what, we're going to pay because it's going to cost us a bit more money, but we know that we're working in a sustainable way? Is that here yet, or not really?
It is coming, but as like many things, it's not moving fast enough, right? Neither is decarbonization agenda. So, for example, there are many leading developers who are doing it. There are examples of that from offices, and more opportunity to retrofit. And also there are some leadership, like I was just checking, Westminster City Council has passed a new policy called Retrofit First. So there are some positive changes in terms of, and people start talking about urban mines and those kind of things, but in many cases, retrofit today starts to also make more sense because of cost pressures we have.
Yeah.
Right. And it also depends which segment of the market you're talking about. Because at the moment, believe it or not, Cat A or top end offices are still a fairly buoyant market in London, right? Those things about, working from home, that has not killed the city in terms of office space that's needed, but it's at the top end. What's going to happen, sadly, I was just talking to a real estate developer yesterday, is he's already seeing plenty of assets, plenty of buildings that are starting to become stranded assets, which will have those locked in minerals and all those quantities of aggregates in them. But at the moment, it's so hard to kind of change their uses, and it's so difficult to do that. They might remain that way until we realize, like you said, hold on, there is a lot of value hidden there.
Yeah, brilliant. So going back to then the primary raw materials for a second and thinking about the embodied human rights, how big is that scope of embodied human rights in a building?
It's just, I mean, if you think about it, think about all the chain that I mentioned, right? Everybody in the chain is part of that human rights chain, all the way to the mining of the raw materials. Everybody's in it. It's the drivers, it's the security guards, it's the cleaners in the office, it's the people working in the mines. It's everybody in that chain. And if you can stretch that, you realize that you are touching so many people across the globe. And if you think about the fact that construction consumes nearly 50% of all raw materials, there is a huge opportunity, but there are plenty of barriers.
So coming back to how do we try and get some of this shift? Because as you said, 50% of all of the raw materials, of course, most of that from a bulk perspective of the aggregates, etc. What is there anything that we can do to help the world of construction make that shift? You've described it being really fragmented, etc. But if we can get construction to make that shift, then the demand for more responsible raw materials, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for someone to say, hey, I want nickel with a low carbon footprint, for example. And so that pull that can come from it, that would be amazing. But is that possible, or what can we do to try and make it possible?
I think data is key. At the moment, we cannot talk about human rights if we don't know what we're talking about.
Okay.
Right. So anything that, and the direction to go with is our focus on decarbonization. Steel is a great example. We are having material certificates, and materials need to have, emissions and other factors. And the more we can collect that data, the more we can actually quantify it, the more we can make it visible, the more likely it will end up one day. Imagine that one day we build these things called BIM models. Imagine that you have, and we talk about, we have potentially virtual buildings. Imagine if you actually bought a building and you bought it with the knowledge of both embodied carbon and embodied human rights, the true cost of building that building.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Burak, thank you so, so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And as you can see, this is always the case with this conference. We start off in the depths of geoscience, and then we go all the way to the other end, and we talk about, well, why do we even care? Because we need to use these materials. We have this demand for these materials. Burak, thank you so, so much. It was absolutely brilliant to see you. Round of
Thank you.
applause.